me this evening from Nairobi. I wish I would speak for the entire global South, but I will speak from my experiences in the industry. It's this discussion that we are having today is very, very far removed from our communities in tourism. And I will probably change the focus of my discussion a little bit from what we can do when we travel to these communities to just look at how communities have been involved in this whole agenda of climate goals and climate actions, especially communities that are in tourism. I have had the information, the knowledge that has been shared. I listened to Andreas very carefully. Thank you, Andreas, for highlighting everything that the tourism industry has been trying to do to go green, with different levels of success in different parts of the world, partly because of the structures and systems of tourism management, and also partly because of the desires of these destinations. Now, if you look at Vision 20, Africa's vision, I think it's Vision 2063 from the African Union, and you look at the numbers of travelers that they aspire Africa to have, every nation is looking for growth. And nobody is weaving in those growth and development goals, nobody is weaving in climate goals. I have looked at Agenda 2063 for tourism development in Africa. Climate goals are not weaved into this agenda. What has been mentioned around sustainability has not been taken up by countries, and there is no evidence that countries are actually taking these sustainability practices that have been mentioned seriously. There are no systems in that Agenda 2063 for accountability for environmental impacts of travel and tourism. Nobody is talking about the invisible impacts of travel. We are all looking at what is on the table and what looks good for GDP and what looks good for economic growth of these destinations. So we have the usual big numbers that you see in any tourism plan. We have the numbers, we want to see arrivals grow by that much. We want to see revenue grow by that much. We want to see infrastructure developed to this extent. We want to see hotel brands and new cities growing into big destinations, more African cities. So it is about the same old things that we have used to measure the impact and growth of tourism. Now, when we come to communities, it is exactly the same situation. When you talk about climate crisis and the agenda and 1.5 degrees, I can tell you for sure that there are many communities in tourism in Africa who have no clue, have no information whatsoever what the climate goals are, because of the way that tourism development has been done and has been promoted in the South. So you find that the sustainability practices are not woven into community tourism development agendas. What comes out very strongly most of the time is that tourism is good for you, tourism is good for revenue generation, tourism is good for job creation, tourism is good for opportunities for entrepreneurship. Nobody says what are the invisible impacts of tourism. In fact, communities learn the hard way about the invisible impacts of tourism, including the over-dependence on tourism in some of our communities. So there is no relating community development goals to climate goals in tourism destination. I have mentioned that even we come from Agenda 2063 at Africa level, you bring it down to climate, to the tourism development strategy for my own country, Kenya. You take it down to all the way to destination, and this to destinations, and the language of climate goals is very, very strange. The only time, most of the time, I think one of the challenges that we have is that we have remained in the global south at the point of information and knowledge about climate. There is a lot of organizations that share the information about climate crisis, awareness, create awareness around it, but real interventions and policies and accountability at that level, you do not see much of it. Much of them are funded projects that have time limits. So we go into a community and we are going to have awareness session on why we need to protect our savannas and why the grass, because the grass is good for carbon holding. And that information ends at that level. In Kenya today, we have 2 communities in tourism that have embraced carbon trading. It has been problematic for 10 years, but their supporting partners have been consistent and have stayed with them because they were not part of a project that was happening and was living at the same time. So consistency is very important. Longevity of programs and consistency is going to be important to get this information and knowledge about climate to our communities. Otherwise, communities will remain recipients of visitors not knowing and be encouraged to continue tourism development, not knowing what long-term impact that would have on their destinations and even in their own livelihoods as they continue to open up their forests, they open up their savannas, they will cut down their trees to build another lodge because there's another investor who is going to create employment. And so this forest that we have protected traditionally for a long time, we can open it up for tourism in the name of authenticity, because authenticity can be abused in tourism to access everything and anything from communities. So even authenticity must have its limits. What is it that communities want to and can share? It's not everything that communities have protected and which is authentic, which should be shared. There's some things that communities should just protect because they are valuable, not just to that community, but to the world at large. So some forests are today disappearing. We are losing out on our forests because we want authentic experiences with communities. We want to go and see how they used to live, what they did in this particular forest, how they, and as we open up these places for use for everyone, they will lose them out and then they are exploited, and the extent of exploitation can never be determined. If you ask many destinations in Africa today, whether there is a country that knows what number of tourists they want to receive as optimal, to tell you that when we get to this number, we know that it is optimal because we have used this method to calculate the ratio of tourism to residents and resources that we have. Tourism today is depleting water in some of our already dry areas because they're savanna areas and they're beautiful and they've got wildlife. So we've got tourism development. And what happens? Because these areas are not serviced with municipal council supply, they end up digging boreholes. So you go to a place like Masai Mara in Kenya or Samburu, and you find hundreds of boreholes. And today, in a place where you had to do probably 100 meters to get water, the last time I was involved in a project or was part of supervising a project that was doing a borehole for communities, now you've got to go 270 meters to try and hit water while digging a borehole in Masai Mara. And it doesn't stop, because with every new camp, there is a borehole that will be sunk in Samburu, with every new camp in Amboseli, there's a borehole that will be sunk. We are depleting the water resources. Tourism is depleting water resources at the expense of creating jobs and revenue generation and all those other things, not knowing that we are actually accelerating cities and destinations that will be water scarce destinations. In just a couple of decades, what we are celebrating today as tourism destinations in my country will have great problems with water. And we know that tourism loves water. Tourism is a big consumer and user of water. So they will use whatever resources they have to go deeper and deeper and deeper and get the waters. Nobody is thinking that we can start getting the water from up by collecting what we have. So if you go to these camps, and some of them have been listed amongst the best in the world today. If you go to these camps, they have won many green awards in different places, but now few of them are collecting water from up. Everybody wants to go down and get water from down, provided they can afford it and they have the technology to do the same. And that in the long term, when we talk about climate, the way climate will affect Africa the most is that it will affect Africa through conflicts. We already see a lot of natural resource conflicts, but the conflicts will emerge between now communities and tourism, because communities do not have the resources to go down and get the water, and they need the water. And they will see across that there is a camp that has got 10 private pools. For every room, there is a private pool, and every guest can have as much water as they can, and their livestock don't have water. We already experienced this in Kenya 5 years ago. We had conflicts between pastoralists in a destination in Kenya called Laikipia. Pastoralists invaded tourism areas and said, we have come for pasture and we have come for water, because you can't have pasture that you are not using. You have grass, you have fenced it in, because this is tourism, you have water, you have fenced it in, our livestock are dying out there, and they invaded these places.